So we're recording. Thank you so much for joining us, Mindy. As I shared with you, I've been having these conversations with colleagues and friends on what each of us can do in big or small ways to make this our world a better place. And you're certainly one of those individuals. Just as a form of introduction, Mindy is a social psychiatrist and professor at give me again, Mindy, New York.
The New School, which is a university in the city of New York.
The New School at the University of New York. And
at the city of New York.
At the city of New York.
Which is a university in the city of New York. But the name is the New School.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. So in 2008, you proposed the creation of the University of Orange, which is a free school for city residents that promotes civic engagement, citizen participation, activism. Rather than reading all that for our audience, can you just give us a little bit of insight into, first of all, what in your thinking came up with that idea? You know, what compelled you, and then what is the university?
Well, Orange, New Jersey is my hometown.
Uh-huh.
And I was one of those kids who was the nerd who was bullied and fled as soon as I could, which was at 16, never to go back. I happened to go back in 2007, and I was struck by many things about Orange. Among them, that it had somehow managed to survive despite all the terrible urban policies that had been thrown at the American city. It had, to that point, you know, taken a licking but kept on ticking. And become a very different place. When I left, it was, 20-30% Black, but 70 to 80% white, and whites were for most of my growing up the dominant group, the segregated city, and provincial. 80% of the kids left high school to go work in local factories. 20% went to college. But when I came back, it was basically 100% people of color from all over the world. So African Americans, but also people from many countries in Africa, people from many countries in South Central America and the Caribbean. And it was just a really interesting place. And it had survived. And its treasures were many of them still there. So it was very interesting. And as I went around the city, I was really struck that the whole story of the American city was written in Orange. You could see it. And it's a small city, 2.2 square miles. So in that small space, you could see the whole history of the American city. So I had the idea that it was a university of the city. And then in talking about that with friends, it became a joke that it was the University of Orange. And then we started joking about, where was the quad? Where were the dorm parties, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What were our teams, our sports teams? So, and then we actually started it. So there's sort of a metaphor, starts out as a metaphor that Orange is the University of the city, but then it became a joke, and then it became a real thing. And what it is it's a community organization that offers free courses, that seeks to tell the stories of Orange, New Jersey, and that shares our brand of urbanism, which we think of as an urbanism that centers life.
And so within it, you have the this concept of collective recovery, right? One of the things that you have been talking about, and that was really interesting to me. I see it as, and maybe it's just a matter of words, but collective healing. How do we come together in caring for each other, right? And I think at this point in time, this opportunity to begin to imagine a new way of being, and there's 4 tenets that you address there, that we need to, within collective recovery, we need to remember, respect, learn, and connect. Can you speak to to us more about what that entails, this concept of remembering, respecting, learning, and connecting?
But just to back up a little bit, so collective recovery is something that my research group, we worked together to articulate after 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Was how is the city to recover? At that time, there was a focus on heroes and victims, and everybody else was supposed to go back to normal.
Mm.
But people were really quite shaken. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. It was very frightening, and movement around the city was very changed. So we said, no, you can't just only take care of the heroes and victims. You actually have to take care of all these other people, all the rest of us. We all need to be taken care of. But how do you take care of, the 15 million people in the greater New York area? So what we came across was this theory of cities, old theory of cities, that said organizations are the crucial layer. And we thought, well, there's a lot of organizations. And if every organization took care of its constituents, you would have taken care of everybody. So that's the basic thought. But then we said, well, what is it organizations do? Because some of these organizations were banks and some were helping the homeless, a lot of different kinds of organizations. They didn't necessarily think that collective recovery was part of their mission. Banks don't necessarily think they're supposed to be doing healing, for example, but we said, no, the banks have to be part of it. So what is it organizations do that's related to this? So we said, well, they help us remember. They help us show respect for each other. It's how we learn. We get together in groups. And it's how we connect. And actually, in the theory of the city, organizations are incredibly important in connecting all the parts. And in a society like ours that's so fractured, organizations become crucial. Those white people and black people, for example, they don't know each other, they don't think alike, but we have organizations that can reach across. Mm. So, and the words are pretty much what you would think. So remembering, it's all the remembering that we have to do. Learning, because every crisis asks us to think about new issues. So after the murder of George Floyd, we really have to think about policing. We have to show respect because in these moments of crisis, it's possible for there to be hatred. For example, with COVID, people started attacking Asians like it was their fault that there was a pandemic. And then connecting in a fractured society, it's always about connection, but every crisis increases the fracture. So we're in smaller and smaller little groups. So how do you put the society together? Because you can't get out of crisis without working together. Mm. So that's the goal of collective recovery.
So in my book that you read, Wheel into Healing, one of the things that really impacted me was the ACEs study. And remembering from the perspective of looking at what happened to you and how that influenced how you engage in the world, right? Is that similar, the similar type of remembering? Because I know that in learning, you talk a lot about not understanding the history, right? Even in the piece that I'm studying with you right now that you've written in Forces to Guardians, you take us back to how the police were actually created, right? In the relationship between England and Ireland. So knowing our history is incredibly important. Can you talk more to that, or am I making sense?
Yeah. Well, that people talk about when we remember, like and we put the members back together, like we reunite the membership. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're thinking about remembering in that way, that in these crises, much is lost. Because more than 120,000 Americans have died from COVID, and countless are going to have very chronic, debilitating conditions, with very serious illness. So how do we remember what we've lost, what they've lost, and honor that? Then learning is sort of, and you go into crisis because there's something you didn't pay attention to. So we're almost talking about what's the secret. And when you wrote about the ACEs in your own life, it was really facing very squarely the the traumas that had happened to you and to other members of your family.
Mhm.
And, you face them so squarely that any reader of the book can really see the line you're drawing between those events in childhood and pitfalls in your adult life. That's real learning.
Mm. Mm. And then we're all different, right? So that's also the respect piece is looking at us as individuals that have had different experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, we're in a society that's structured around disrespect.
Mm. Mm.
Um, the, just one example, public housing is very ugly, most of it. The public housing that is ugly was built in the 1950s in the Cold War. So what's the Cold War about? The Cold War is about discrediting socialism, which is holding up the working class as opposed to the capitalist class. So how do you discredit socialism? You have to discredit the working class and poor people.
Mm.
So one of the ways they did that was they made ugly buildings. So if
Mm.
you look at public housing built before then, it's quite handsome, a lot of it. So they knew how to make really functional, really handsome public housing, but they made ugly public housing because they were trying to tear down communism. That's disrespect. So it's everywhere in our landscape. And if you go into a neighborhood of poor people, the garbage is not picked up well. When there's a fire, it's not put out promptly, and the buildings are not rebuilt. That's disrespect. If the city can pick up garbage well in the rich neighborhood, it can pick up garbage well in the poor neighborhood. If we can rebuild a house in a rich neighborhood after a fire, we can rebuild a house in a poor neighborhood after a fire. If we don't, that's disrespect. So our whole society is organized around showing large groups of people disrespect.
Mm.
Reverend William Barber talks about there being 140 million poor and low-wage workers in the United States, all of whom are shown disrespect all the time. So respect is about saying, okay, if we're going to heal this society, we have to start showing respect in every way that we possibly can.
And before we get to each of our how we can each do that as individuals, can you talk a little bit about the importance of within that? There's got to be, we're relational beings, right? We need social connectedness in order to. That's one of the aspects of well-being is our social connectedness. Can you talk a little bit about that piece of it?
Yeah, we are social beings, and it's interesting to see that as there's reopening, people just charge out to be in clumps.
Mm.
It's obviously, I mean, they're not simply stupid.
Right.
They are stupid,
Right.
but they're not simply stupid.
Right.
The great urbanist Jane Jacobs said, people like to be where people are.
Mm.
Sort of you go to a park in New York City on any given day, you have the park to yourself. Leave the park and go to the nearest main street. It's packed with people.
Mm.
So it's not just because people don't know there's a nice park nearby. They're drawn there in ways that we cannot even explain. So we are relational, but in a stratified society, we're broken into clumps. So relational within our clumps.
Mm.
So photo in the New Jersey paper this morning of young white people gathering at a bar, which caused the governor to rescind some of the reopening.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all young white people, right? Because we're a fractured society. It's not white and black. It's not white and Latin. It's just white people. But it could be Latins or it could be black people, but they're white presenting. So, our big problem is that we are stratified by race and class and gender and religion. Our big gift is that we are relational. And because of that, we are in organizations. Our organizations can connect across the divides, and we could heal, because it's the breaking that's making us sick.
And in watching that interview that was done with Dr. Luis Rodriguez, one of the things that was interesting, the things that are happening at this point in time, like seamstresses making masks, right? And she talked about barbershops and salons, that they knew about trauma because they have personal relationships with the people that they serve, could actually have these deep conversations that are healing, right? Healing and transformative. So can you leave us with, again, some thoughts from your perspective in ways in which we can, in big and small ways that we can actually enhance the world we live in?
Well, but just to stick with the theme of collective recovery, every one of us is part of organizations.
Mm,
And every one of us can say to those organizations, we are part of recovery. And what is ours to do? And so, say you're part of your block club, your block can say, what is ours to do? And people have invented, like at the level of the block, strange things. I was reading today about a woman who invented porch ninjas, where the neighbors sneak around in the night and leave treats on each other's porches.
wow. That's wonderful.
Families can say, what is ours to do to heal our family, right? So families have, one woman had a trivia contest every day for
Mm,
like 50 people in her family.
mm,
And people were very competitive, took it very seriously. So whatever group you're part of, and every group you're part of, you can say, what is ours to do? But you also say, what's mine to do? What is it that in this time of stress am I supposed to be doing? I know how to sew, I can make masks. I know how to bake, I can share baking. I can go demonstrate.
mm.
I can wear a mask when I'm outside because that is an important way to show respect. Do you know that old hymn? If you can't preach like Peter, if you can preach like Peter, if you can pray like Paul, go out and tell your neighbor he died to save us all. It was like, what is your gift? Use your gift.
Mm.
So we all have gifts. And then in this time, we need the gifts of all of us if we're going to get through.
Thank you, Mindy.
You're welcome, James.